The Competition Commission has released its final report on the grocery retail market inquiry. The Commission has found that exclusive leases, trading practices and regulatory and competitive support are lacking in this market. For more, I'm joined by my colleague Liabo Setho, who has been covering this story. Thanks very much, Liabo, for joining us.
Thank you, Nompu.
So just elaborate on some of the key findings made by the Competition Commission.
So you know that this inquiry started in 2015. So its main aim was to look into the grocery retail market and to see if there's any anti-competitive behavior that is happening there. You'll know that when it's the Competition Commission that is looking into something, it has to do with competition, whether there is fair competition or unfair competition practices that are contravened in the Competition Act. And with this particular inquiry, it found that the issue of exclusive leases, right, this has been a big issue, particularly with smaller retailers and your entrepreneurial and SMME grocery retailers, where you find that you have big retailers, the ones that we know, your Spar, your Checkers, your Pick n Pay, your Woolworths. They find that in the 2,000 plus malls that South Africa has, they dominate about 70% of they are in the mall, 70% of the malls. And with that, you find that they have leases that go from around 20 to 40 years, which means that the space for new entrants to come in becomes much more distorted. They are not able to effectively compete with the bigger guys. So this is what this inquiry has found, and said that there actually has to be a look at that. What they haven't told us is how they're going to deal with leases that are already existing. But what I found interesting with this particular report is that, as opposed to the other reports, you may remember the construction report, you know, there were previously penalties that were imposed.
Yes.
But in this case, they're given 6 months, this market or the sector has given 6 months to rectify and see if there are ways in which they can do things better before the law is enforced on the market. And then there's also the issue of fair trading practices, right? Same thing with issues of rentals. You know, it found that in some instances, some big players, you know, are given favorable procurement rates, favorable rental rates, which obviously make it easier for them to work and make money. But if you're a small guy, you're an SMME, you are coming in, you are going to pay much more, and eventually you're going to have to close shop. I'm sure you know of a lot of small businesses that have to close shop because they just simply cannot afford the rates. So it looks at something like that, and it is a 600-page report. It's quite a
650.
650-page report. So I'm still going to go through that in detail, and of course the issue of regulation and competition. Here it looked at particularly your spaza shops as well. You know, what support can they be given, because you'll know that the spaza shop market is dying in the township because malls are moving into the townships, right? And you also find foreign-owned shops who are setting up in the townships. So those market if you grew up like me and you knew a spaza shop, now it's no more. So it's looking at how the regulation has made it difficult for spaza shops to thrive, and also looking at, you know, issues like access to credit. You know, have they been disadvantaged, and to what extent? So those were the 3 main things that this report has found. But what I said earlier on, that they looked at giving them 6 months to try and rectify. Of course, the Consumer Goods Council, I did contact them this afternoon to find out if they have read the report. They said they're still going through it with their legal representative, and then afterwards they'll come back to us. Remember, they represent most of the big retailers that are mentioned or implicated in this inquiry.
I find it quite interesting, Liabo, around exactly how they're going to resolve this problem, because part of the draw for malls with big anchor tenants is, you know, if you get a Pick n Pay or whatever, they want to establish a contract with them first before they can attract other shops or retailers to come in, because if they don't have that anchor tenant who they can guarantee for a longer period, it's quite difficult for them to run the mall efficiently, because the big stores have the benefits of, you know, they have the benefit of efficiencies, because like you say, they can buy more at a cheaper rate and so on and so forth. It's basic economics. economics. If you're smaller, it's going to be difficult. So I don't know how they're going to overcome that reality.
It remains to be seen indeed how they're going to overcome that reality. But remember, one of the important things that government also is trying to do is make sure that they have an open economy and a much more inclusive economy. So they don't want to look at the big anchor tenants like your big retailers as the only people who will be money spinners, right? You know that small businesses are said that they would be creating more jobs and they will be contributing more to the economy. So if you start with regulating small things like those and giving them equal access to places like the malls, and I mean, if you're going to have a 40-year lease, exclusive lease that is, what are you expecting the younger businesses to do when they come there, and what space do they have? So from my point of view, that part actually makes sense, where they say that these long leases actually, and they're exclusive, they don't make sense. You know, try to see how you can fix them up, or try to open up the market so that other new entrants come in.
But then it's not just the problem of the retailers, is it? It's also the problem of the property sector, your real estate investment trusts, because obviously, like I was saying, they thrive on having anchor tenants. So that means their business model is going to have to change. If you look at what happened with Edcon, for example, they decided to give them a discount on their rental because they were too big to fail, according to the rates. So
it's going to be very interesting, actually, to see how the property sector actually responds to this, like you say, because that is where the money comes in for them. But I'm almost wanting to say that it's going to force them to try and be innovative this time around, you know, and not to use the old trusted method of saying, if I'm going to build a mall at a particular place, I'm guaranteed with this big anchor tenant, because now the rules are going to have to change. And you know, we also asked if there was any opposition from the participants, you know, and they said, look, there were one or two, you know, but a little birdie tells me that your SPA and your Checkers people were trying to be a bit difficult, but finally they have managed to come to an agreement. But what you should know, Nompu, is that the Competition Commission seems to be very determined to make sure that all these inquiries that it has started a couple of years ago are being completed by the end of this month. In fact, they tell us that next week they'll be releasing the data one. To look into the cost of data, and the following week they'll be releasing one on transport to look at the transport sector. So those are two very interesting market inquiries reports to be looked into.
Just on the data front, part of the problem is government, isn't it? They were supposed to have released spectrum a long time ago, and the likes of Vodacom told us a long time ago that should that be introduced in the market, they would be able to halve the prices of data. So why has government delayed in this regard?
I can't really tell you, but what I think the issue is in my time that I have reported with data is that they wanted to make sure that everyone is able to have a piece of the spectrum, right? Because you remember we have three major telecommunications companies who are big enough to be able to compete for the spectrum. Then you have the smaller ones who may not necessarily have the cash, you know, to buy the auctioned spectrum. And what government wanted to do is make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to buy into the spectrum, so that they don't do the same thing that we saw with this inquiry, where, you know, the market is only dominated by a few. You still see new entrants coming into the market. So I'm very excited about next week's one, actually.
Super. All right, we'll hear from you on that one next week. Thanks very much, my colleague there, Liabo Setho.